Hello, everyone. Welcome to an IEC Lunch and Learn. We are thrilled you all could make it. We're going to give people just another 30 seconds to connect to audio and join. Then we will get rolling here. In the meantime, if you don't mind, just in the chat, putting your name and organization and pronouns, so we can get just a good sense of who's here. All right. While folks are doing that, I just kind of want to tee up what we're doing today and what some of the goals are. So, as I think everyone on here knows, the federal government passed an incredibly historic climate and jobs bill very recently, and so we want to make sure we walk through the Inflation Reduction Act with our members and partners and environmental advocates from around the state. So there's a lot in the bill. There are a lot of pieces that are energy and climate related, and there are a lot of pieces that are not energy and climate related. We are going to focus on the energy and climate pieces today, and we can kind of briefly touch on some of the tax and prescription drug pieces as well, because I think they're just important to understand kind of the top lines on. So with that, and then we're going to kind of go through an overview of the bill, and then I'll get into a little bit of some of the Illinois specific numbers and pieces. And with that, I just want to preface, like, there is a lot of there are still a lot of things to figure out. There's still guidance to be pushed out on all these programs. There's still some timing and details to figure out. So what we are, I think, really trying to accomplish here is make sure we're keeping you all up to speed and on where we are so far, and kind of make sure we're ready, both as the environmental community and advocates in Illinois, but also as a state, to take advantage of these funds and programs when they are ready to be issued and released. So with that, let me introduce our special guest speaker. Matthew Davis is joining us from the League of Conservation Voters. He's the Senior Director of Government Affairs. Matthew was instrumental in, one, making sure this bill got passed, and making sure a lot of the energy and tax incentive pieces were well thought out, and that our community of environmental advocates in states was educated on this, and that we were able to make the case to our congressional delegations. So with that, Matthew, I'll turn it over to you and let you share your screen and give everyone a sense of what we got going on here.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you so much to the Illinois Environmental Council for inviting me here today and being such great partners in this fight. IEC, in addition to our 31 other state affiliates around the country, really did a ton of work to get this across the finish line. And it's the work that they do with all of you across the state of Illinois that really made this possible. Without the groundswell of engagement around climate, both leading up to the election of the Biden-Harris administration, and pro-environment and pro-democracy majorities in the House and the Senate, we really would not, and all of the effort that activists and organizations like you did across the across the time period from the election through getting this bill done is both very impressive and very necessary. Had we not had that momentum and that groundswell of support from states, from local communities, and from activists, we would have had a very, very hard time getting this across the finish line. So thank you all for that. I'm hoping to provide a sort of at least a brief understanding, an outline of what is in the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically, like Brian said, on climate, clean energy, environmental justice pieces. There are lots of different pieces in the bill, and so I won't go through all of it. I don't want to put everyone to sleep. And then, Brian is going to talk a little bit about sort of how it relates to Illinois. And then I think the question and answer period will, I think, hopefully be very helpful and interactive for you all. So I am going to share my screen. I have some slides that, apologies for being very text heavy, but hopefully will be helpful in getting a little bit of better understanding about kind of what's in the bill. So let me get to that. Okay, so hopefully folks are seeing a slide here. It's historic and major. So the Inflation Reduction Act, or I'm going to do my best to refer to it as the IRA, but some people refer to it as the IRA. I'm hoping to sort of frame up a number of different sectors where what the bill does in sort of big picture pieces. There are a lot of there's a lot of different pieces, so we won't go through all of them, but this gives you a brief outline here of how we think about it at LCV. I'll also say that as Brian alluded to, there were a number of other provisions related to taxes and healthcare, and the changes to the tax code will help make the tax code a little bit more fair. It's certainly not all the way fair, so I don't want to oversell it, but the changes in the tax code, which included one environmental thing, which is reinstating the Superfund tax on oil companies in particular, is very good. It's only a small piece of the pie in terms of raising funds for doing the work that we need to do. But anyway, it's a step in the right direction. And then, of course, the healthcare related pieces, which are also very important, but are not a major focus of ours. So, all right, so I'm gonna walk through. First thing is, what does this mean for what does this mean for emissions reductions? This is a graph that the very well-respected folks at the Rhodium Group put together, showing the U.S. Climate emissions over time. You can see, at 2021 here, there's then the dotted lines of this is the range of what current policy, i.e. business as usual, will get us by 2030. And you can see that's a reduction of 24 to 35%. And then the Inflation Reduction Act gets us a reduction in emissions. Again, no other changes, just business as usual plus this bill will get us 31 to 44% reductions in emissions by 2030. You'll note that doesn't get us all the way to the goal of 50 to 52% reductions by 2030, which is what science says that we need to do and what the US has committed to on the international stage. But getting to a roughly 40% reduction with this bill gets 50% well within reach, with additional federal administrative actions and continuing state actions. You all passed a fantastic bill in Illinois. Many other states have done similar. There are states that are still fighting to get some of those baseline clean energy and climate bills across the finish line, and also to accelerate the good state policies. All of those things, federal, administrative, state, and local, will be needed to add on top of this to get to the 50%. So just want to be very clear. This makes a big difference. This bill makes a very big difference. It won't get us all the way there. So we will keep on fighting to get all the way there. So one of the biggest pieces certainly in terms of dollar amounts and in terms of emissions reduction is in the clean energy space. 10-year extensions of the tax credits or tax incentives that help transition our electricity grid from fossil fuel to clean renewable energy. This is the longest extension we've ever gotten. It is at full value, which for the investment tax credit is 30%. It also has full value production tax credit extension, and it has very strong labor requirements, and also domestic content phasing in a few years. Right now it's a bonus, but I say right now, I really should say in January 2023 it will be a bonus. So this sends a very strong signal to the electricity market, which direction to go. We're already seeing the transition happen. This will speed it up. And it provides that long-term certainty that we need to build the stuff here in the US, so that we're making the panels here, we're making the nacelles here, we're making the gears here for wind, batteries for storage. There's a ton in here that sends a very strong message to transition the economy to clean energy and to build the stuff here and with good labor requirements and apprenticeship. So I won't click through all of these, but the other one that I want to focus on is some of the equity pieces that are layered in woven throughout the bill. There's an additional incentive for putting solar energy in low-income communities and in previously fossil fuel dependent communities, so that there's directing of the reinvestment and the investment in clean energy. There's an additional piece that's a 20% for low-income or affordable housing units to have solar either on the property or on the building, as long as they're delivering the benefits to the residents in terms of reductions in the cost of their bills. So anyway, there's a lot of really good bonus incentives to direct those projects to the places that really deserve them the most. The $27 billion greenhouse gas reduction fund has also been called a climate bank or a green bank. This also has strong requirements for directing these benefits and these investments to environmental justice communities. There's a specific carve out of that 27 billion, 7 billion going directly to community solar in those places, so that I think overall this program should get upwards of 60% of benefits going to environmental justice communities, which is above and beyond the Biden-Harris administration goal of 40% for their Justice 40 initiative. So throughout this, we certainly will be focusing on implementation to drive equity and to drive investment in communities harmed the most from fossil energy, which I think all of us here on the line today know are primarily communities of color and low-income communities, low-wealth communities. So anyway, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund or the Climate Bank is really important for catalyzing that growth of good stuff. and helping, again, transition away, closing down the polluting stuff. Want to mention rural co-ops here, $9.7 billion for them to transition from dirty energy sources to clean. Helps retire the debt on some of these plants that really has kind of handcuffed co-ops to keeping, say, a coal plant or an old dirty gas plant running. And so this $9.7 billion will really help get those co-ops out of that. One of the things that we did not like that was in the bill, and there are a number, I guess there's kind of three big ones. The carbon capture and sequestration benefits for power plants. We pushed back against inclusion of this, and we were not able to keep it out, but we were able to get sideboards so that the pollution, there's a capture rate of at least 75% at each unit in a facility, and that per unit specification is important. We think this will help dissuade investors or utilities from looking to get carbon capture on old coal plants or gas plants. Will this completely keep everyone from trying it? I can't say the answer is yes, unfortunately. But I think this one, we'll have to see how it plays out, and we certainly will push and fight those CCS installments at fossil plants, because we don't think that's the appropriate use of the technology, and we don't want to keep these polluting facilities up when we have great alternatives that are cleaner. Okay, so I'm going to leave clean energy and head over to transportation. There's a ton in there in transportation. The thing that's gotten the most attention has been consumer-focused rebates. They're really a tax incentive, but they're formulated in such a way that it can be provided as a rebate at point of sale. That makes a big difference in terms of the consumer actually feeling it, and helping tip the consumer toward getting an electric vehicle instead of a gas vehicle. There's a variety of different requirements about the content of the battery, both in terms of the minerals and other components. That makes it a little bit hard exactly to predict just how good this will be for electric vehicles. It's definitely good for electric vehicles. It's definitely going to make a big difference in terms of manufacturing here in our country, because there is a requirement that electric vehicles getting this credit be domestically assembled. I'm sorry, North American assembled, which I know is a difference. I apologize about that. Originally, it was a U.S. Assembled, and it also provided a bonus for union assembled. That bonus went away and was objected to by Senator Manchin and was not included. And the U.S. domestically assembled was made broader to be North American assembled. So there's additional investments in fueling infrastructure, not as much as in the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, but still good investments here. Clean ports is very important for a lot of communities that are very impacted by freight pollution, which again, often low-income communities, communities of color. And there are, in addition, and this is, I think, a very important piece, that it can deal with trucks, but it can also deal with the ships themselves in terms of reducing emissions from them. And then there's a variety of different work here to boost manufacturing for clean vehicles here in the US, and for the technologies that go into them, so batteries as well. And I will keep moving since I don't want to talk for too long here. Healthy communities. So there are a variety of different. I would argue that all of these pieces help us with healthy communities, but these are ones that I think fell pretty. We felt like fell into this category most clearly. The environmental justice block grants, I think, are really major. $3 billion is a lot of funding for this program. Very well needed and very well deserved. But it was a fight to, to make it this big and keep it in this big. There's also funding to reconnect communities and invest in transit options in communities that especially have been hurt by usually interstate highway projects, but other highway projects. And so that is another $3 billion there, a very important investment, and primarily for communities of color and for low wealth communities. An oft forgotten about investment is about $1 billion for improving the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act process, so that communities can engage better in major projects that are being considered for completion, or I shouldn't say for completion, but major projects that are being considered, and for the environmental review that goes into them as well. The agencies that do this work in the federal government have been vastly underfunded and understaffed for a long time. And so we are very hopeful that this will mean better, more robust engagement, upfront engagement, so that communities are able to shape what's happening and improve them to be what they need and what they want. So anyway, that's something that doesn't get talked about very much, but I think very important. And then there's funding for tribal communities around climate resiliency and electrification projects. Clean manufacturing, I think I mentioned this before, but there's a lot in this bill that will boost manufacturing of the clean technologies we need here in the US. I'm not going to walk through all of these, but there's a bunch of tax incentives. There's a bunch of specific programs. There's procurement funding and funding for the federal government to buy clean. It does not mandate buy clean. It's not, but it provides investments to really get it off the ground and get federal agencies and encourage state agencies to be buying the cleanest steel and the cleanest concrete and the cleanest different kinds of building products, both for sort of highways, bridges, that kind of infrastructure, and also for buildings, new or renovations of government buildings. So anyway, there's a ton in here, and I can't go through all of them right here, but anyway, at least you've got a sense from this list. And then there's further on buildings. I think the thing that's gotten a good deal of attention, and rightly so, is around helping consumers or everyday homeowners make improvements to their houses that make them emit less carbon and make them more comfortable and efficient, and also pollution free. So there will be incentives to switch over from methane gas stoves to electric induction stoves, incentives to switch over to heat pumps, electric heat pumps. And so there's also some good funding in here for making affordable housing more energy efficient and also more water efficient, which of course saves the homeowners and the renters who are in the homes. Agriculture also got, I think, a good deal of funding here, over $21 billion of investments in programs that we know already work, things like the Conservation Reserve Program, Conservation Stewardship Program, EQIP. So there's a REAP, which is the Renewable Rural Energy Assistance Program to get more renewable energy projects running in rural areas. So there's a good deal here for agriculture and for primarily in rural communities. And then also about a $5 billion program, or $5 billion investment in a variety of programs to improve forestry practices, both make them more climate resilient, make forests more climate resilient, and protect communities from wildfire, and also look to make sure we're doing the best work we can to have forests drawing down carbon out of the atmosphere and drawing down climate pollution. The public lands and waters, a number of good things and a couple of very bad things. So There are increases in fees and royalties for oil and gas development, which is long overdue and very good, will hopefully decrease the amount of interest from oil and gas companies in doing business on public federal lands. There are some good coastal restoration and National Park Service funding. I mentioned the $5 billion for forestry in the agriculture slide, but it's also listed here. So that's not 10 billion total. It's just the same $5 billion in two different places. But let me spend a little bit of time on these potentially harmful provisions. One of them is reviving previously canceled or leases held up by the courts. 3 in the Gulf and 1 off the coast of Alaska, Cook Inlet. These are leases that we have fought, and many others have fought, indigenous communities, local communities, environmental justice communities, BIPOC-led organizations. And it is unconscionable that, the Congress decided to overrule the judiciary and say, no, you really need to do these. This was the price to get Senator Manchin. We feel like overall that even with these provisions that we fought against, we oppose, the overall scope of the bill was very positive. Estimates from modelers say, we're looking at about, 5% of overall emissions, of the emissions reductions of the bill getting eclipsed by some of these leasing provisions. But it's hard to know. Also, a lease doesn't necessarily mean lead to drilling, because sometimes people don't bid, and sometimes even if they bid, they don't end up developing those projects. And I'll give you an example about that in a sec. The other provision that relates to oil and gas drilling is basically requiring offshore lease sales to be conducted for oil and gas if there's going to be offshore wind leases conducted, or sales conducted by the federal government. And then for onshore, there's a requirement for onshore leasing if there's necessary rights of way for renewable energy projects on public lands. So this is the oil and gas industry's last gasp attempt to basically tie themselves to renewables, which they know is moving forward and which they know has momentum. It ends up working out to be a little basically like mandated business as usual. In a bad administration, I think that that's likely what will happen. In a better administration, like where we are right now, I think that the administration will be able to do things to minimize the potential harm from this. And as I said before, doing the leases doesn't necessarily mean drilling. The administration, the Biden-Harris administration, can do a lot to help reduce the likelihood that the leases end up in drilling. So I hold out a lot of hope. We're working very closely with allies across the environmental movement and the environmental justice movement and the administration to figure out the way to make these the least impactful for communities and for the climate. One example I'll give just very briefly is the Trump administration opened up the Arctic Wildlife Refuge to oil and gas drilling. Or oil and gas leasing. This is something that we oppose, many others have opposed, the Gwich'in have opposed. We lost that fight on the Trump administration, unfortunately. Congress, Republicans in Congress acted, Trump administration acted, and there was a lease. There were 3 entities that bid for only a small portion of the lease area. 2 of those have since withdrawn their bids and said, we want our money back, we don't want to be engaged in this. And the only holder of a lease right now is a state of Alaska entity that doesn't even do oil development. This is all because of the outcry around protecting the Arctic, pressure on big banks, pressure on oil and gas companies not to bid, not to be engaged in this. And I hold out some amount of hope that the same sort of energy and attention can be driven on these required leases that we know have to move forward, that have been revived by this bill, that we can do the same sort of thing and see none of the major oil companies bidding, none of the major banks bankrolling smaller entities trying to bid to minimize any potential impact. So anyway, I bring that as a, this is sort of a playbook to use, and also gives me hope that we'll be able to really blunt the impact of these. Okay, so I'm done with the what's in the bill. I just wanted to lay out a little bit like, here's what we're going to do from here: winning the win, fighting the API watermark permitting bill, which is sort of like a side deal that is now, trying to get through Congress. The in-state awesome work that you all are doing in Illinois and across the country and states to advance great state policies, our regulatory and federal administrative work, and then the implementation, and especially focused on the swift and equitable implementation of these investments and resources. So that's sort of where we're heading. Thank you all for your attention through this, and I'm going to kick it back to Brian. Let me stop sharing here.
All right, thank you, Matthew. That was excellent. Just walking us through. This is obviously an enormous bill with a ton of moving parts and a ton of complex incentives and programs and funding streams. So thank you for breaking that down. I will say, keep putting questions in the chat. I'm trying to compile them, and we'll go through them at the end. I kind of want to do a quick run through of some of the Illinois specific pieces and numbers that we know so far. And then we can open it up for questions. And I've got a bunch of those that you guys have put in the chat so far teed up. So let me now share my screen. You guys see that? If I can get just like one thumbs up. All right, great. Hopefully you can't see the like 35 open tabs I have above this, because that's embarrassing for me. So I just want to walk through some of the basics on what this means for Illinois. And again, a lot of this is going to be, we're going to have to work through guidance and grant opportunities and kind of pushing the state to leverage these investments as much as possible. So I will also talk a little bit about kind of what we can do at the end. So let me just start with some of the energy cost pieces. As Matthew said, the rebates are going to cover 50 to 100% of the cost of installing a lot of new electric appliances. That opens this up for millions of low and moderate income households in Illinois to be eligible for rebates. Tax credits are able to cover 30% of the cost to install rooftop solar and other energy efficiency improvements. So the projections that I saw estimate nearly 300,000 additional Illinois households will install rooftop solar as a result. That is one example of one of the energy efficiency improvements there. If anyone has seen any of like our press conferences or events with Senator Durbin lately, he's been very excited to tell you that he just put rooftop solar on his home in Springfield. And so he'll, I think, kind of be a really good champion on this one to continue pushing. There are grants to help state and local governments adopt building energy standards. So just those, and that does not include the home energy improvement rebates and savings, but that can save a homeowner in Illinois almost 10% on their utility bills annually by average. On the jobs front, and I will happily send these links around, and I'll put this in the chat as well. I'm going to start at the bottom, actually. Our partners at Climate Jobs Illinois and specifically Pat Devaney, who's the Secretary Treasurer of the AFL, wrote a letter to the editor that went in the Sun Times recently, kind of highlighting what the IRA means for Illinois workers and specifically for union jobs and for labor. And then in addition, I was at an event recently with U.S. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh and Congresswoman Lauren Underwood in Batavia at the IBEW Hall, where they kind of talked through again what this means for union jobs, what this means for prevailing wage and better paying jobs. We also filmed some video that we'll send out once we finish editing it, around kind of the two of them having a conversation on this. But the estimates here are this can bring an estimated up to $18 billion of investment to clean energy power generation and storage. There are tax credits across all renewable sectors, including bonuses for business to increase wages and pay prevailing wage. So, again, a lot of this is to be determined, but there's some really excellent opportunities here just from a job standpoint. On electric vehicles, Matthew walked through the numbers, but this potentially can build on top of CEJA's EV rebate of $4,000 for an EV, and I think it's $1,500 for an electric motorcycle. In addition, being able to provide up to $7,500 for a new electric vehicle and $4,000 for a used electric vehicle. So this opens up that to potentially millions more folks in Illinois. Local governments and school districts are eligible for credits through the direct pay option in IRA to again for energy efficiency upgrades and healthier school and air quality options. CEJA also provided incentives for public schools to offset costs of solar power and other energy efficiency upgrades. So just another example of it being able to stack one on top of the other. Just because we passed the state bill, that doesn't mean we're not eligible for everything in the federal bill. In fact, I would say it makes us more likely to incentivize school districts and local governments pushing on these programs. Matthew mentioned there's a lot of money in here for climate smart agriculture. There's money for electric co-ops, direct incentives and investments to boost reliability, make it more affordable, resiliency initiatives. Illinois obviously has a lot of farms and a lot of rural land, and so this particularly could be a huge boon in state. All that being said, I think the biggest synchronicity with CEJA is this continues to incentivize the transition away from fossil fuels into 100% clean energy. Oops, I missed that middle bullet there, but CEJA sets the framework for this and sets the policy infrastructure and the timelines in place. The IRA incentivizes manufacturers, power providers, governments, communities to speed up and supercharge this transition. So being able to, we've already got a lot of this moving in the right direction, and this is a potentially huge increase in funds and incentives to speed this work up. I don't want to go into all of these, but just so we've got them someplace, and I'll happily send these slides around. Just a few numbers on what this means in terms of prescription drugs and expanding healthcare. The big ticket items are this bill allows Medicare to negotiate the price of prescription drugs, and it also caps out-of-pocket costs for Medicare and for Medicare beneficiaries on insulin. There are some pretty incredible numbers here. These are, it also expands some Affordable Care Act expansion pieces as well. I will not focus on those. If anyone is interested in more info on the healthcare side of things, I can send some materials over. I think one of the messages we want to get across here is with CEJA in place, Illinois should be really well positioned to take advantage of a lot of these investments. They're going to work to, again, transition towards clean energy and create a lot of jobs. And because not only do we have a year of a head start because we passed this bill a year ago, but we also have, frankly, an argument to be made for a little more of that because with the FIJA fight and our just community being well organized and us having pushed the state for years now, we've got a head start on policy infrastructure, on hopefully on state agency preparation and project planning, and on advocacy. So we should really be able to kind of push the ball forward to make sure that the Inflation Reduction Act works in tandem with CEJA. So what do we need to do? We need to push the state and local governments to take advantage of these funding opportunities. So there's going to be grant opportunities and things to apply for. We need to educate lawmakers and educate our communities on what's in the bill. So we don't all need to be as knowledgeable as Matthew on every aspect of the bill here, but there's going to be a lot of places where on what is available for a local municipality or for local governments or for a school district that are going to be helpful for us to be able to push. And I think in general, from a communications and messaging standpoint, being able to frame Illinois as a really smart place to spend federal climate dollars is going to be really important. So how do we do that? Through telling stories of how CEJA is improving people's lives, telling stories how the infrastructure bill money, like just yesterday, or maybe a couple of days ago, it got announced that through the infrastructure bill, there's tens of millions of dollars to plug orphan gas wells, and Illinois is getting, I think, almost $30 million for this. Tell stories about when we start to get them about the Inflation Reduction Act in general, how are federal funds being used effectively in state. We have a supportive governor of these programs. We have a supportive legislature of these programs, and we have a really active advocacy community. And so being able to kind of push those things forward and raise those messages as there are funding opportunities, I think is going to be really, really crucial. So I'm going to stop sharing there and open it up for some questions. And I'm going to start with a couple of the ones we got early on, and then I'm going to continue to run through the chat, which I couldn't see during when I was presenting. So a few people asked something similar to this. Matthew, do you mind just kind of talking through timelines in general? When do programs potentially kick in? When do we expect, guidance on this? What is the next, I don't know, what do timelines look like on this, on the bill?
Sure thing. Thanks, Brian, and thanks for the question from the audience. Yeah, there are a variety of start dates for the programs. I think most of them in the clean energy climate space are starting in January 2023. There were changes that happened immediately in the electric vehicle credit in terms of what vehicles were eligible. And that was the requirement that it be North American assembled vehicle. So that took effect immediately upon signature of the bill, which happened earlier in August. But then in terms of in terms of resetting the clock, as it were, on allowing folks, auto companies that have already hit the limit of the existing law of 200,000 vehicles sold, that doesn't reset until the end of this year, and January 1st, 2023. So anyway, so there's a variety of specific pieces in all of the different aspects, but in terms of rebates for electrifying your home and insulating your home and those kinds of things, those changes will take place in January. And in terms of the guidance, I think most of the agencies, especially the IRS, IRS has a lot to implement from this. They are going to be working on policy and guidance documents. Who knows exactly how quickly they'll get them out? we're starting to engage with them and make sure that as they're making these decisions, they're making them in a way that make it easier for low-income communities and working families to get the incentives. Removing as many barriers as possible to those is certainly some of the things that we'll be asking them for. But it's hard to say exactly how quickly they will come out. But they're working on them and they're trying to roll them out quick.
Great, thank you. Can you? I know you talked about some of the provisions that we don't like in this. Can you just talk through a little bit more on like strategy of how is LCV like opposing inclusion of these provisions, especially kind of, with a lot of, as Dave put it, some must pass bills coming up in terms of government, funding and omnibus appropriations. And then potentially, and I know you're going to work on that with us for me to pass along, but how can we kind of instate, what can we do here to start opposing these provisions as well?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that question. Very important. So I didn't mention that part of the getting Manchin to agree to these investments in climate action and environmental justice was an agreement that there be a permitting rollback passed later, because they couldn't pass it through budget reconciliation because of the rules of what can be included in budget reconciliation. That went to our benefit in this case, that there would be a second vehicle where this basically a bill to undermine the permitting process, especially in favor of fossil fuel development, but other development as well. We came out with a statement today with a number of environmental justice and environmental group partners in opposition to the bill. We've been quoted in news articles opposing the bill. We are also organizing to support Chairman Grijalva of the House Natural Resources Committee, who is leading a Dear Colleague letter in opposition to this proposal and to sticking it on any must-pass bills. So the strategy is to provide enough, especially members in the House, but I think there are also members in the Senate who aren't so willing to go along as well, to make sure leadership knows that they don't have the votes and that there's too much opposition for these to move forward. For sort of what folks in Illinois and back in districts can do, I think talking about contacting your your senators and also your members of the House and telling them you oppose it, that we don't need this. People, I think there's a misunderstanding among folks who are very supportive of getting clean energy built, that they think they need to undermine permitting processes in order to get the stuff built. I think that's a false choice. And this bill is not written by the clean energy industry. This is a bill that was heavily consulted by the fossil fuel industry. It's got the American Petroleum Institute watermark on it because this text was shared with API early on to get their opinion about it, and that's what leaked out, was the version that went to them. So contacting members and saying, fight against this, oppose this, we don't need this, I think is the best thing that folks can do. If you happen to be able to come to DC September 8th to join in the lobby days against the bill, that day, lobby meetings against it, and also a rally is happening at 5 p.m. Eastern on September 8th. That's great, but given you all are in Chicago, or I'm sorry, across Illinois, not just Chicago, you're not right next door. For folks in Maryland, great for them to come to DC. So those are things that folks can do. I'd say there's some discussion about sort of how much will this really reduce emissions as well. there are a number of analysts and modelers out there who've come to a similar conclusion of this bill on top of business as usual, driving to roughly 40%, maybe a little bit more, maybe a smidge less reduction in emissions, even with the bad, what I outlined as bad leasing provisions in here. So I don't think that there's an overall sense that like, oh gosh, we gave away much too much. We gave away more than we wanted to give away, and to call it giving it away, I think is also not quite accurate, because we weren't the ones making the deal. We weren't the ones in the room. We weren't consulted. It came about, and this was our opportunity to pass historic legislation, and it came with a major downside.
Thanks, Matthew. Dave, I think that covered your 9-8 question as well. Couple folks were asking and sent me messages, just not to walk through all of the like EJ provisions again, but I think kind of what can we do to, I guess, advocate for kind of taking most advantage of EJ funds. We've got really active environmental justice organizations in state, and we have a lot of really impacted EJ communities. So Matthew, do you mind just, kind of big ticket, like what are the big things we should focus on, and kind of where do we put our efforts?
Yeah, so I would say, especially right out of the gate, so the White House estimate is that at least $60 billion in this package is directed at environmental justice initiatives. Those include things like the $3 billion for cleaning up ports, the $3 billion for reconnecting communities, split by interstate highways or other highways, and also in that mix of 60 billion that are really specifically for environmental justice, the $27 billion greenhouse gas reduction fund, which people also refer to as sort of a national green bank or climate bank, is a big chunk of it. That funding has to be mobilized very quickly. And the idea being that there are climate banks and green banks set up in states and localities that can really use the added capital to get projects running, to get projects being built, whether it's a community solar farm or whether it's making affordable housing more efficient and saving electricity and energy use. There's a variety of different ways that climate and green banks do their work, but that money, that $27 billion, leverages much more. It's not straight grants. It leverages much larger loans to these projects to get them off the ground. And in many places, there are climate and green banks ready to go, already set up. So this funding will come out quickly. We certainly will be pushing EPA on equity and focusing on that and making that part of implementation. So not just where is the money going, but who is making decisions about where the money is going, and making sure that people from communities that have faced over decades fossil fuel pollution, that they are helping drive some of the decisions about where the money is going. I think some of those decisions will take place at the state and local level, where the folks who want to apply to the state green bank will be working to put together their project. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, especially for communities that have a sense of, we really want a community solar farm. We know where we want it, or we've got this great high school with a flat roof. Like, we want community solar there. So I think where communities already have a feeling for, like, this is what we want, or we want a pollution monitor. We have a facility and we want a fence line monitor. There's money going to the EPA as part of this for that as well. So I think making sure communities have a sense of what they want and what they need, and then being ready to jump on the opportunities and apply to the things, or petition the state if the state is the one giving out the money, or the state climate bank or the local climate bank or the county. That to me is the best thing. I put a link to a great report that just came out from the Center for American Progress, which basically documents all the different funding for state and local entities. That will be very helpful too, I think, in making sure people understand where are there different pots of money, and to whom should I be looking for additional guidance and application guidelines.
All right, I think we've reached our hour. We're gonna save the chat, and I'll try and follow up with folks on other questions we didn't get to. There were a couple others on like, how do we get boots on the ground and, you know, make sure everyone is educated on the individual like homeowner pieces. I think we've got some thoughts on that, and they'll be, you know, I'm not sure actually, Matthew, maybe real quick, is there money for like community groups on the, like, to educate on these programs, or is that something that like advocates should be pushing on their own?
I'm not sure. I know that there's some amount of money for the implementation of the greenhouse gas reduction fund, but I don't know that there's overall like grants to help explain what the bill does, or anything along those lines. There's certainly going to be a ton of resources coming out from not only advocacy groups like Center for American Progress and LCV and others, but also Rewiring America actually has a really good calculator out there that I should have put in the chat. But anyway, all the federal agencies are also going to be putting out a lot of resources. So I think it's up to advocates we do our best to make sure that people know where those resources are and get them to the right people. But it will be challenging. It will take us all working on it to make sure we're good.
Excellent. And we will send out, Tucker just put in, we will send out links that Matthew shared. We'll send out some other resources we've collected. Feel free to reach out if there are, you know, other explainers or things that would be helpful, that we can compile. And thank you everyone for coming. Matthew, thank you so much for your time and expertise on this. This was invaluable for us. So really appreciate it. Thanks everyone. We'll see everyone soon.